Hi pals, it's me, Artie, they them pronouns only. This week's video I wanted to talk about pacing. The gist of pacing is it is one of many tools that are used and suggested a lot by NHS, generally a lot of doctors, GPs, pain management. Basically everybody suggests pacing. It's kind of like the way people suggest mindfulness as if it will fix everything. I wanted to talk about pacing as a chronically ill person, as a neurodivergent person, etc., etc., because pacing has been one of the few things that helps me manage my time and energy in a way that works for me. But in the original sort of discussions about pacing, they are very clinical. There's not really a lot of nuance when it's being suggested or discussed with chronic pain or chronic illness patients, fatigue patients, and a lot of people I know basically consider this another form of gaslighting, which I totally understand. I'm not going to argue that at all. I really can see that from the way it tends to be explained by doctors and also the way it's assumed or almost regarded as a cure for chronic conditions that are like there's likely no cure at this current point in time because we don't put enough money into the research and research takes a really long time. So the way pacing can be described to people, it does feel really frustrating, the idea that you're not allowed to do things because it doesn't fit in your pacing, doesn't fit in the pacing structure. And also it kind of goes along with this idea of continually improving and building up your ability to do things. So Psychology Tools describes it as some forms of chronic pain and fatigue are thought to be maintained by boom and bust patterns of activity. The individual will be active when they are feeling well, but will often overdo it, leading once again to high levels of pain or fatigue. Pacing is a technique whereby activity is increased from a low baseline in a controlled manner. The idea is to make activity more consistent and less dependent upon how the individual is feeling. Pacing for pain and fatigue is an information sheet which presents information about the technique separately for chronic pain and fatigue. It should be noted that current evidence for pacing is somewhat equivocal. Love that. Thank you for using words I don't fucking know. Equivocal is open to more than one interpretation, which is basically what I'll be doing in this video, is talking about my interpretation. To me, yeah, that description is kind of gaslighty. The idea that you have control over improving. I think a lot of chronically ill people understand that at some point it is unlikely improvements will happen. You may have times of remission where maybe your health has stabilized a little bit. You may have times where you have got improvement, but the experience of chronic illness is very dynamic and very individual to the person. I was shown by a graph what this is supposed to sort of look like. So the bottom line is just time, and then the line that goes up the side is how much energy you use or do or can use. There is a section dead in like the middle which is your happy medium, and there is a little bit of leeway up and down where you can do a little bit more and be okay, or do a little bit less and be okay. And this is sort of your living moderately section, which is where they tend to stay. Keep within these and you're good. Many doctors will say that you must stick to this range basically forever and ever. That, or you always have to be pushing that upper limit to try and gain more ability or activity levels, and that you're basically cured by doing this. But generally living moderately is hard and is also quite boring and can be very soul-sucking. And obviously it's not a cure. You still have the health conditions you have that can be very unpredictable, and they kind of just do whatever they want no matter what you do anyway. There are some ways that people can generally manage some symptoms, but that doesn't mean the condition is gone. And also sometimes those things that work one day don't work another day. And also you can still deteriorate if you're doing pacing perfectly, which is not really something that tends to be discussed very often. A lot of doctors seem to think that if you rest too much, so below this minimum line, you will get worse. So you must keep working to improve or maintain your baseline. This is also not many people's experiences. There are a lot of health conditions that do require either constant rest and care in that way, or at least long periods of it, particularly if you have deteriorated or are having a flare-up of some kind. And it is often actually very necessary to rest for a more successful experience of pacing, but also just for the good of your health overall and the long-term look of your life and your health conditions. And there are some health conditions where it is required to rest for even a semi-decent shot at possibly recovering, or at least mostly recovering. I believe that long COVID is one of those things that if you catch COVID, you really need to rest and listen to your body rather than pushing through. Because the pushing through aspect is the thing that tends to actually possibly make a lot of those long COVID symptoms worse and then less likely to recover from them. If I can find sources, I will provide them in the description. It's very similar to how graded exercise is finally confirmed as bad for people with ME/CFS. I'm not very good at saying the acronyms, but also I can't pronounce ME in full, so and I believe that we will start seeing more evidence to support that for other long-term conditions, especially ones that involve fatigue. And we really should not be pushing through all the time, especially if you are not able to, you feel like that you've reached well beyond that higher line, or if you feel like that you will probably not cope with the PEM, which is the post-exertional malaise, after doing all of this pushing through. I learned about pacing in about 2016, 2017. It was the first time I went to pain management. So I learned this from a pain management specialist who was also a psychologist, but she also experienced chronic pain herself. So I did feel a lot more safe and comfortable having these kinds of conversations with her. She was one of the first validating doctors I'd had when it came to mysterious chronic pain. And I feel like that experience really had a very positive impact on me because I felt more able to have an open dialogue, and it felt a lot more like I was speaking to somebody who really understood the experience I was going through, as it was something she also experienced in her own life and not just something she'd studied. This, and along with many other examples as to why having disabled, chronically ill, neurodivergent doctors in our healthcare system is really important, because there are a lot more neurodivergent people out there than we think. Especially after COVID, there's a lot more chronically ill and disabled people than we realise, and I really think that if we could do something about the current system in a lot of countries and provide a more accessible doctor environment for disabled doctors, I think we would have a lot of improvements in patient-doctor relationships and care. Whilst there were a lot of things in pain management that really weren't for me, like mindfulness and meditation, like sometimes I have enjoyed a guided meditation, or I enjoy the shavasana of yoga. I really like the just laying there and doing nothing in my yoga practice. Mindfulness and meditation were just not for me. Like I said earlier, I did find pacing was one of the things I found useful once I kind of figured out my own way that suited me. It took a lot of time to experiment with what I personally needed, and obviously my needs also changed over time, and I feel like that's something that we all need to keep in mind. Our needs do change, our abilities change, so do our coping mechanisms. Much like how I thought the spoon theory was great when I first heard about it, because I'd never really heard of a theory that really discussed or encompassed fatigue and pain in a way that was a little bit more accessible. In practice, it didn't really make a lot of sense to me. Hi, autism. So honestly, I work a little bit more on like a Sims or like some kind of games character HP needs level vibe. It's a lot less specific, like, you know, I have 3 spoons for this day and this activity will take 1 spoon. It's a lot more like, ah yes, here is my general levels for the things that I need, and here is my sort of vague feeling of where I'm at. Less specific, but helps me work out what my needs are and how to address them. I also find it generally helpful to think of it in more of like a Sims way, because then you also take into account other kinds of needs that are important for energy and pain related stuff, like food and sleep and if yeah, you know, Sims. But also even just a general character HP bar can be helpful, that there are certain things that knock off some points, and then there are things you can do to put points back on. So that's one way that I have sort of explained things to other people as well, but this is how I explained pacing to someone recently from my own point of view. I see pacing as a form of discipline in many ways. It is the discipline of getting to know your body and its needs. It's the discipline of respecting those needs and respecting when your body is telling you it has done enough. But also pacing is and has to be flexible, which isn't really how they talk about it like in a doctor's office or in like the booklets they provide. Sometimes you do have to push yourself past that upper moderate bar to do things that will have a physical impact on your body in a negative way, but it's so that you can also take care of your mental health. Living moderately often means that you're being told to prioritise day-to-day tasks and capitalism. And that's not very joyful. So sometimes you have to do things that, you know, are kind of against what you've been taught in this manner to feel some joy, whether that's hanging out with friends or going to see a film or concert. You know, those things can have a bigger impact on you physically, but can really refill that emotional cup that you might not be able to tend to in the really strict format of pacing. Pacing is the balance between what your body needs and what your mental health needs, and they can conflict. I talk about and remind people regularly in videos when I talk about disability that access needs can contradict each other and conflict, and that's the same in a human being. I've talked about how my ADHD and autism can conflict quite a lot. I've talked about how my ADHD can conflict with my chronic illnesses. And it's kind of just trying to find those balances and where you feel like you can use that energy and when you can't. Yeah, it's about weighing up what you can handle and if it's worth the payback afterwards. It's also an important tool to find ways of doing your daily tasks that take up less energy but help your mental health as well. You can keep it up or do more of them. Like if you struggle with brushing your teeth, like twice a day, maybe go with once a day in a mouthwash, or a chewable, like you can get these chewable ones so you don't actually have to get out of bed, or you can keep them in your bag in case you've realised you've forgotten to brush your teeth on your way out. Thanks, Evie, who mentioned this to me. I don't use those, but like I feel like that can be a useful tool for some people, or even flossing from bed instead. Also learning how to do makeup in bed, or learning when and how to take breaks, finding adapted brushes or products that make it take less effort to apply, or like products that will do the job that you need just with less steps or less work. Many people find doing their makeup really helps with their mental health, but it is often challenging very physically, and as well as like a lot of us really struggle with a lot of general self-care things and personal hygiene, so it is helpful to find ways to make doing some of those things or keeping on top of that a little bit easier and take less energy. Like a recent example for me and my pacing in the last couple of months has been I really had to push myself out of my emotional, mental and physical comfort zone to travel, especially when I went to Norway by myself, first time travelling alone. If you want to know more about that, here's that video. But also what I had to do after travelling and before travelling. I had to rest a lot working up to the travelling so that I wasn't expending energy and dealing with a lot of PEM. Oh god, I always get those things the wrong way around. Post-exertional minute? Yeah, that one. Yeah, so I wouldn't deal with PEM before or when I'm at the airport. Also managing my energy whilst I was away and then resting more afterwards because it was very exhausting and left me with a lot of chronic pain and a flare up of my fatigue, which I haven't really shut up about in a lot of my videos. Yeah, I've had to rest a lot since traveling, which has led me to not being able to do as much of my usual things I would be doing, and I've had to prioritize things differently. So a lot of my prioritization has gone on just taking care of myself, making sure I eat. I was struggling to eat food, as well as still putting out my videos, because for me, my YouTube, my videos is a really high priority for me, but also still having to tackle a lot of medical admin, which is obviously, unfortunately, a high priority. And obviously I had to rest a lot more whilst I was away, which did lead to me not being able to do a lot of the things I did want to do, including going out in the evenings and exploring certain venues. Throughout all of that, I needed to allow my mind and body time to rest, so that I would either not have such a huge crash, or I was going to at least have a shot at getting back to my baseline before I went travelling. It's also part of why I've not made the media videos recently. I have found that they take a lot of mental energy, and when I have a lot of fatigue, it does mean that I can't use my brain that way. So instead, I've made more personal videos about my recent experiences with medical cannabis and ADHD meds. And then also this video too about pacing. And then also a lot of the sitting and filming and preparing to film takes a lot of energy that I haven't had. Like, a lot of the videos have been a lot more difficult for me to film because my brain is a lot foggier. It's a lot slower even on my ADHD medication. And for example, filming the recent Skins video took 3 hours of filming because my brain was just so tired and was really struggling to create one coherent thought. And I also had to rest in the middle of it. And usually my videos take maybe an hour, maybe 2, it really depends on filming. And there was also the struggle of just even being able to verbalize my thoughts. It just felt like a lot of my sentences were stuck in my head and I couldn't quite get them to come out of my mouth in the way that I wanted them to come out. So yeah, I had to cut back on that content to give myself the recovery time and to be able to provide the kind of detail and analysis that I am proud of in my upcoming media related videos, but also still being able to put out a video every week that I felt pleased with. So yeah, as to not force myself to do anything that was too much for me at the time. It has been quite difficult dealing with that decline, because I have been doing quite well with making my videos and my media analysis videos, and I could usually sort of get all that done quite quickly, but because of the decline, I've definitely noticed I just haven't been able to do it in the shorter amount of time that I was doing it. So it's also hard dealing with when your health does have take a dip, but generally I always try to remind people to go forward with compassion for yourself and kindness, because it's not your fault. It's not your fault that this is what your body does. It is just a natural variation in the human race. And of course, there is also other aspects that I maybe don't necessarily have to deal with in the same way as a lot of other people. We're going to have a capitalism rant, of course, because anti-capitalist Artie is here, always. A lot of people have to work to survive. They have to do jobs that are inaccessible to them and really drain their energy, and that includes for neurodivergent people, as well as mentally ill people, disabled people, chronically ill people, etc, etc. Many people who need to rest more would benefit from pacing in a way that actually would work for them, but can't actually do that because they have to work to survive. Because the world we live in, unfortunately, there's not really a lot of ways where you can rest in the way that you need to without being at risk of homelessness or risk of abuse, etc, etc. Like, I'm very lucky in my circumstances that my mum is very supportive and very understanding that this is just my body. My body is just made like this, and I don't really have a lot of say in the matter. So whilst, again, I'm trying to build my own way of working that works for me, it's a very long process of doing that. So a lot of people don't have the time and energy to put into that sort of thing like I have been able to, thanks to my family being very understanding and supporting me whilst I am a sick adult. But yeah, many other people can't stop working, or they will stop living or surviving. And also many benefits that are out there, or welfare, or whatever other places call government support, do not cover a lot of basic needs, and they are extremely difficult to access in majority of countries. It's not a system built with sick, disabled, neurodivergent people in mind. And this is the sort of thing that leads to burnout, whether it's PEM or neurodivergent, ADHD, autistic burnout, meltdowns, breakdowns, crashes. And I mean, as I read from the website at the start, boom and bust. A lot of people cannot get out of boom and bust because of capitalism. And that can lead to worsening health as well. Your health conditions can then be really impacted by that. And so is your mental health. You're less likely to be able to have a social life or experience a lot of joy because your energy has to go on to working just so you can kind of get by. So yeah, that's my video talking about pacing. I personally, I don't know how specific I got with my personal experience of doing pacing, but I personally tend to stick to my moderate, but also then try to do things that definitely go way above that, just so I can experience life, pretty much. I feel like living moderately in this space, or trying to progressively build up your tolerance to things, is honestly quite miserable. And I really don't mean this to be harsh to people who are unable to pace, or really have to be in the resting, like your pacing is just resting. I've been there. I really don't mean it in a criticism to individuals who have to live that way. I just have it as more of a criticism to the doctors and specialists who deliver pacing as this is the only way you should be pacing. I also vary how much my activity is leading up to events that would take more energy. Yeah, I'd rather be safe than sorry when it comes to when I know I've got an event or like plans with somebody. I know that those kinds of things take a lot more energy than my usual day-to-day stuff, or it takes a different kind of energy. So yeah, I'd rather be a bit more careful with my energy for a few days leading up to me doing something out of the house or seeing people and talking to people, to make sure that I feel it's more likely that I will feel able to still go and still participate and still enjoy myself, rather than continuing my usual activities in a way that would probably mean that I would actually be maybe too tired to go, or too tired to enjoy myself if I did go. So yeah, for a couple of days before I meet my friends in town, I will be a bit more conservative about my energy levels and what kind of energy I'm using. And then also I'll make sure that I don't have a bunch of other stuff to do the couple of days afterwards, so I can have a more of a leeway in resting. And if I don't need the rest, then I can do something with that time. I feel like I was quite lucky in the person who taught me about pacing. I think she did discuss it with me with more nuance than a lot of other people have had the experience of, probably because of her own personal experience. And again, it's not a one-size-fits-all. Not everyone will benefit from pacing. Not everyone will find a way that they can pace, especially in the society that we live in. I just hope that this could be a way that can make more sense to people out there who are maybe interested in trying pacing, but are really frustrated with the way it's been explained to them. Yeah, I just kind of hope this video can be a point of view shifter for people, open up some questions. I'm sure I haven't covered everything in this, obviously. I did ask a few of my friends who are chronically ill, neurodivergent, disabled, etc. So thank you to everybody who did mention things that they find frustrating about pacing. I can't remember exactly who said what things, but yeah, there are definitely things that I had kind of forgotten about, and I'm glad to be able to at least address some of those in this video. As usual, if there's anything that you think I've missed or something that you think you would like to talk more about with somebody who has got more experience of doing this, because oh my god, yeah, I've been doing this for a while now, haven't I? Is that like 5 years? Yeah, if you either have any thoughts or tips of your own, put those in the comments. If you've got any questions, put those in the comments. Maybe I or somebody else can answer or give some of our experiences or input on that. But yeah, like I've said, 5 years of doing this, it's definitely not stayed the same. There was a period of time where I was at university and I was able to do that. I went out and did things, and I got a whole degree, but I got sicker with Crohn's and Takayasu's, which led to me being basically bedbound for a year, if not longer, and then COVID happened, so it's not like I was going outside anywhere. And then only within this sort of like last few-ish months when I've been able to get my pain under a bit more control and sleep better, have I felt more able to do things and sort of reach and branch out and do things a little bit more risky and energy sucking. But yeah, like there is no one right way to do, at least to do pacing, but also it's not for everybody. Yeah, I just hope that this can be a helpful video for some people. Absolutely no hate to people who see pacing as gaslighting. I do totally get it. Unfortunately, the system we're in medical or healthcare generally, it's not great for believing chronically ill patients, neurodivergent patients, and they don't know enough to talk through these things with enough nuance a lot of the time. So yeah, I hope this video was useful. I hope it can give some insight to my experience and maybe some ideas for you to try. I do have a couple of videos about sort of executive dysfunction as well, which could kind of go hand in hand with pacing, about ways of doing things you have to do a little bit easier so that you do them, but also don't waste all of your energy trying to just do them the way that everyone else tells you should be doing them. Don't forget to like the video, leave your comments, subscribe if you haven't already. Sharing my videos is very helpful as well. It all helps the algorithm and stuff like that, blah, blah, blah. I almost feel like a real YouTuber because I basically had an actual script for this one, and I don't usually like properly script things out, so I'm a little bit like, wow. Also, I haven't done my accent today, so I'm gonna do a little bit of my Aussie accent for my Aussie mates because I love you. I have a permanent echolalia of just doing a really bad Aussie accent, you know. That was for you, Soph. Love you, XOXO. Anyway, in case it wasn't obvious or you didn't know, I have to have a good lie down after doing these videos, and that's on pacing. Sitting upright takes a lot of energy, my guy. Yeah, so I'll see you next week. Bye.